So we're going to get started with I hate hats. Who loves sewing hats? Nobody? I usually get at least 2 or 3 people raise their hands. Most of us hate sewing hats, and that's why it's the name of the presentation. So the first question I'm going to ask everybody is this. What is it that you think is the number one thing that all embroiderers do wrong sewing hats? The absolute number one thing. Nope. Nope. Everything's a factor, but the number one thing everybody does wrong is they try to sew too big. Okay? So there's many cap styles that exist in the industry. The biggest thing everybody does wrong is try to sew too big. Now, the numbers I'm giving you on the screen may be numbers you may not agree with, but I'm telling you, those numbers right there, if you use those and limit what you're trying to embroider on those particular style of caps, you will be successful with not just 2 out of 4 or 6 out of 12 or 10 out of 20. You'll be successful on all hats. Who has multi-head machines? Any multi-head users in here? All single head users? So when you do a dozen hats and you're trying to go 2.4 inches on a Richardson 112, does every one of those hats come out looking identical to each other? They usually do not, right? And if you think about it, every hat has a variable in it. Sometimes it's the height of the crown, exact same style, out of the exact same sleeve. Some of those hats are slightly taller than others in that same sleeve. The other issue you get into is at the bottom, it's the ramp, and you'll see that here in a little bit. The ramp is the increase of where the hat goes up, where the bill is, it goes up to where the teeth are and the cap driver system is on your machine. That's above the bed, right? If you were in my maintenance class, everything about a presser foot. A presser foot's job is to compress the material to the needle plate so the needle can enter, then the needle can exit, and a stitch can be created successfully, okay? When the presser foot hits the ramp, it cannot push the hat to the needle plate. And if it cannot do that, several things are going to happen. One, you may be breaking needles right at the bill of the hat. 2, it may miss stitches. 3, it may want to shred the thread because it's deflecting the needle too much. If you're real lucky and it does so, you ever notice that the letters going across the bottom and in the center, they will come up on you? So they were 1/4 inch letters, but the 3 around the seam are shorter in height than the rest of them. That tells you that you're sewing too low on the hat. Unstructured low profile caps for best results, 1.8 inches. Structured mid-profile, this is the most common hat we sell, which is our trucker hats, right? Now the Pro Style 5-panel caps, 2.25 inches. Now in the past, guys, I have embroidered logos as high as 3 inches on the front of a hat on a commercial embroidery machine back in the 90s. Nowadays they call them old man hats, but they still make these. Back then they were called golf hats. Does anybody remember what a golf hat looked like? It's 5 panels, it had no seam in it, and it had a little braid that went across the front. Now, I'm not talking about the inexpensive foam hats that are actually not made for embroidery. Those are made for transfers, vinyl, heat press, things like that. These were normally a poplin twill material. They didn't have a backing in them, but they were backed because they would have a flap inside that could be pulled up or down, right? Some of those hats were 4.5 inches tall. So keep in mind, the height of the hat determines how big the logo can go, because all hats on all cap drivers on all machines sew upside down, 180 degrees. If this is my needle plate and this is the crown of my cap, it can only go back until what? It touches. Now once it touches, it still has to do what? Rotate on the cylinder. So when you're sewing too tall on the top, or you got your position too high on it, I see that a lot from my customers. You know, they're trying to sew a 2-inch logo. They say, hey, it's not working. The text doesn't work along the top. They send a picture and they're 1 inch off the strap on the bottom. Like, you got to sew lower. They're like, I'm scared. I'm like, you still have to sew lower. Practice, right? You get scared. You know, if you mess up, you're going to break your machine. But you got to sew as low as possible and find that center position where you can sew as low as you can and as high as you can, okay? Which one of those hat styles, as far as unstructured low profile, structured trucker caps, pro style, good example of the pro style in a 6-panel would be New Eras, Major League Baseball caps, right? Pretty tall crown, right? They actually embroider great because they lay really flat on the needle plate. Out of those styles, what do you think is my favorite hat to sew? Unstructured low profile. And I've got customers that hate them. And the reason they hate them is because they don't know how to adjust their cap frames properly to hoop the hats tight enough. That's the problem you get into with the low profile unstructured. All of your cap drivers that come with your equipment are completely adjustable for different thicknesses of hats. Some people never get around to figuring that out or researching it. They just hoop. If the hat doesn't work, they kind of tell the customers like, yeah, they don't make that hat anymore. I can't embroider it. Let's do this one. All right? And the reason is, on unstructured caps, they lay perfectly flat on the needle plate. I can normally sew logos out of Dakota Collectibles that's not digitized for a hat. I can sew at 850, 900 RPMs, right? And the secret to that hat is simple. Hoop it tight enough, and always 2 layers of cap backing. Not 1, 2, okay? Why do they call backing stabilizer? It's an unstable hat. You need to add stabilizer to it, which is backing. If it's the really cheap ones like the painter's hats, do the same thing. But do not try to rip both pieces of cap backing at the same time. Because if the hat's cheap enough, guess what it does? It rips the hat. So always rip 1 sheet of the tearaway off at a time. Okay? How to embroider beanie, skull, snow cap, style caps. If you got any French people or Canadians, it's called a toque in Canada. And the only difference between any of those, of what you're naming it, is simply geography. It's where you're located at. Some people up south call it a beanie. Some people in the north call it a snow cap, skull cap. It's simple, guys. It's not a hat. Don't ever treat it like a hat. Don't embroider it like a hat. Do not use cap backing, which is a tearaway. You use a good 2.5 ounce, my preference is 2 layers of conventional bonded backing, solvay on top, and you hoop it flat. You hoop all of the backing and only half of what you need to embroider on the beanie. And you can embroider a 5-inch logo, 30,000 stitches, and it will turn out beautiful. If you try the tearaway method, nothing lines up, it draws up, it puckers. My favorite hoops to hoop those with is either the 18 centimeter hoop that came with your machine, the big round one, or the 5.5 magnetic hoops made by Hoopmaster, okay? Those things are worth their weight in gold. And now, either one of those hoops, most beanies, when I do it, will stretch to go over the top of it. This is the one item that I'll tell you it's okay if it stretches. Doesn't matter. Why? When you're done embroidering, it may cup up on you a little bit, right? Just the whole thing. But how many people do you know walk around with a snow cap in their pocket and they pull it out and show it to you and say, hey, look how this is cupped up? Nobody, right? Where do you see a snow cap? On your head. And when you put it on your head, what happens to it? Stretches right back out and looks like it did when it was inside the hoop. So it's the one garment that I could tell you, I don't care if you stretch it or not. It's not going to hurt a thing.